Big news. A family member finally told the truth about why they kept you and your soulmate apart. My beloved child, be still for just one heartbeat, because a silence that lasted far too long is finally beginning to speak. Somewhere beyond everything you thought you understood, a hidden conversation has reached its final chapter. A voice that remained quiet for reasons only time could explain is now ready to reveal why the path between you and your soulmate seemed endlessly delayed. This is not about blame. It is about understanding. And what you are about to hear may rearrange the way you remember every unanswered question. So don't rush away. There is a reason these words found you today. And before this message reaches its final moment, a missing piece will quietly fall into place. For a long time, you believed distance meant absence. You wondered if silence meant someone had forgotten you. You questioned whether every delay was proof that your story had been written differently than you hoped. But imagine something unexpected. Imagine that the greatest obstacle was never the connection itself. Imagine that someone close to the story carried a truth too heavy to speak aloud. Not because they wanted to erase your place, but because they believed they were protecting something they did not fully understand. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the people standing closest to a door are also the ones afraid to open it. They see possibilities you cannot see, yet fear convinces them to hold the handle a little longer. What if every confusing moment was connected to one decision made in silence long before you ever realized it? The remarkable part is this: hidden truths have a rhythm. They remain buried only until the moment they can no longer stay beneath the surface. And recently, something changed. A conversation happened that no one expected. A simple question was asked. An honest pause followed. Then came words that had never been spoken before. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just honest enough to shift everything. A family member finally admitted that keeping distance between you and your soulmate was never about your worth. It was about fear of the unknown. Fear that life might change too quickly. Fear that two powerful journeys joining together would transform everything familiar. Fear often disguises itself as caution, and caution can look confusing when you stand on the outside looking in. Think back to those moments when everything seemed almost ready, then suddenly nothing happened. Messages delayed. Opportunities faded. Meetings postponed by circumstances that made no sense. You searched for reasons inside yourself. You replayed every choice. Yet what if those interruptions were never reflections of your value? What if they were echoes of someone else's uncertainty? The truth has an unusual way of arriving. It doesn't knock loudly. It quietly removes every false explanation until only reality remains. Stay with this thought a little longer, because another layer is about to appear, and once you see it, many memories may begin connecting in ways they never have before. Picture a room where conversations ended the moment your name entered the discussion. Not because your name carried something negative, but because it carried possibility. Possibility has always made uncertain hearts uncomfortable. One family member kept saying, "Maybe later. Maybe this isn't the right time." Those words sounded reasonable on the surface, yet underneath them lived a different emotion entirely. They feared change more than they trusted destiny. They believed waiting would keep everyone safe. But time has a way of revealing that delaying truth never truly protects anyone. It simply postpones understanding. Now notice what is happening. That same person who once stayed quiet has begun looking back at every decision with different eyes. They have started realizing that silence often creates bigger questions than honesty ever could. They finally understand that holding two paths apart did not erase the connection. It only delayed the moment when clarity could arrive. And clarity, once awakened, moves with remarkable confidence. It cannot be hidden forever. Here's something even more surprising. The truth was never waiting for permission. It was waiting for readiness. There is a difference. Some answers arrive only when every heart involved can hear them without fear. That moment is beginning now. You may not see every piece today, but you are standing at the edge of an entirely different chapter. Before you continue, keep listening carefully, because the next revelation uncovers what this family member finally confessed, and why those words changed the direction of the entire story in a way no one expected. A quiet shift has already begun, and if you listen closely, you'll realize this isn't the kind of truth that disappears once it's spoken. It grows stronger with every passing moment. So remain with me just a little longer, because the confession that followed was unlike anything anyone expected. Every word carried the weight of years, yet it also carried the freedom that only honesty can bring. The family member finally looked around the room and admitted something they had never allowed themselves to say before. I wasn't trying to stop the connection, they confessed. I was trying to stop the uncertainty I felt inside myself. That single sentence changed everything. Suddenly, every delay, every confusing silence, every unexpected detour began making sense. It wasn't a judgment against you. It wasn't proof that your soulmate had forgotten you. It was simply the result of someone believing they could control a future they couldn't fully understand. For the first time, everyone listening realized that fear often wears the mask of wisdom. It speaks gently. It sounds convincing. It even believes it is doing the right thing. But eventually, truth becomes impossible to ignore. And when that moment arrives, old assumptions begin falling away without anyone forcing them. Imagine how powerful that realization is. The very person who once encouraged distance is now quietly recognizing that every attempt to delay what was meaningful only created more questions than answers. Now think about your own journey. How many times did you wonder if the silence meant the story had ended? How many moments convinced you that nothing meaningful was happening behind the scenes? Yet life often moves in places our eyes cannot reach. While you were learning patience, other hearts were learning honesty. While you were searching for answers, someone else was gathering the courage to finally release them. That is why today's message feels different. It carries movement instead of uncertainty. There is another detail that almost no one noticed. Once the truth was spoken aloud, the atmosphere itself seemed lighter. Conversations became easier. Faces softened. Even the people who had remained cautious suddenly began asking different questions. Instead of wondering whether the connection should continue, they quietly wondered what might happen if they simply stopped standing in its way. That change may sound small, but moments like these often become the turning points people recognize only after looking back. Perhaps this message reached you because you're standing at a similar crossroads in your own life. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough doesn't begin with a dramatic event. Sometimes it begins with one honest sentence spoken by one unexpected person. That single moment creates a ripple that reaches places no one imagined. And once the ripple starts, it rarely travels alone. If these words resonate with your heart, perhaps leave a comment sharing what part spoke to you the most. Share this message with someone who may need encouragement today, and if these stories continue to inspire you, consider subscribing so we can keep exploring these meaningful journeys together. But don't leave yet, because the deepest part of this story has not been revealed. The confession explained why the distance happened. But the next chapter uncovers what changed immediately after the truth came out. And when you hear what unfolded next, you'll understand why this wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of an entirely new one. Everything became strangely quiet after the confession, not the kind of silence filled with uncertainty, but the kind that arrives when every hidden piece finally settles into its rightful place. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to defend the past. For a brief moment, it felt as though time itself had paused, allowing everyone to see the story from a completely different perspective. Stay with this moment, because what happened next revealed something far more powerful than anyone expected. The family member who had carried this secret for so long finally looked beyond their own fears. They admitted that every decision had been made through the lens of uncertainty rather than understanding. They realized that trying to protect the future had only complicated the present. That realization didn't erase the past, but it opened a door that had remained closed for far too long. Sometimes the greatest change doesn't happen when circumstances shift. It happens when someone's perspective transforms. And once a heart truly changes, every conversation that follows begins moving in a new direction. Almost immediately, something remarkable unfolded. The people who once avoided mentioning your connection began speaking about it naturally. Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity replaced hesitation. Instead of wondering whether the connection should remain distant, they began asking what would happen if everyone simply allowed life to unfold without unnecessary resistance. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Yet the atmosphere carried a quiet confidence that had never existed before. Here's the part that few people recognize. Truth doesn't simply reveal what happened yesterday, it prepares the ground for tomorrow. Every honest conversation creates space for new possibilities that couldn't exist while silence remained. Think about that for a moment. For so long, it may have seemed as though nothing was changing. Yet beneath the surface, understanding was slowly replacing fear. While you believed the story had reached its limit, another chapter was already being written where no one could see it. What if the delays you've questioned for so long were never permanent walls? What if they were temporary pauses while everyone involved learned lessons they couldn't have learned any other way? That thought changes everything. Suddenly, every unanswered question becomes part of a larger picture instead of a collection of random moments. Sometimes life's greatest clarity arrives only after enough time has passed for every heart to grow beyond its old fears. And there was one final realization that echoed through everyone present. The family member quietly admitted, "I thought I was protecting everyone, but I now understand that honesty would have brought peace much sooner." Those words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. No one argued. No one interrupted. Because deep inside, everyone recognized the quiet power of that admission. It wasn't about regret. It was about wisdom finally catching up with experience. If you've stayed with this journey until now, you've probably noticed that this story was never really about separation. It has always been about awakening. Sometimes people need time before they can recognize the difference between fear and genuine guidance. Once they do, everything begins to move with a new sense of purpose. That is why today's message isn't asking you to look backward with disappointment. It's inviting you to look forward with greater understanding. But don't assume you've heard the entire story yet. The most meaningful discovery still lies ahead. In the next chapter, you'll hear what happened after this truth began spreading through the family, and why one unexpected conversation created a ripple that reached far beyond anyone's imagination. What followed wasn't something people planned, it was something they finally became ready to accept. A new chapter quietly unfolded. Not because the world suddenly changed overnight, but because one honest truth had already begun transforming every heart it touched. What once felt impossible now seemed surprisingly natural. The conversations became warmer. The hesitation faded. And for the first time in a long while, people stopped asking, "Should this connection exist?" and started asking, "Why did we wait so long to understand it?" Stay with this final stretch, because everything you've heard until now leads to one unforgettable realization. As the days passed, the family member who had carried the burden of silence noticed something unexpected. The more they spoke honestly, the lighter they felt. They no longer needed to protect old stories or defend old decisions. Instead, they found themselves encouraging openness where fear had once ruled. It wasn't because someone forced them to change. It happened because truth has a quiet power that reshapes even the strongest doubts. Once that transformation begins, it inspires others to see with fresh eyes as well. One by one, other relatives began reflecting on the past. They remembered conversations that had seemed insignificant at the time but now carried an entirely different meaning. They realized that every delay had been built upon assumptions rather than certainty. And assumptions, no matter how convincing they appear, can never replace genuine understanding. That realization created something rare, a sense of peace where confusion had once lived. Then came the moment no one expected. The family member smiled gently and said, "If I could relive those years, I would choose trust over hesitation every single time." There was no sadness in those words. Only wisdom. Only growth. Only the quiet confidence that comes when someone finally accepts the lessons life has been trying to teach all along. In that instant, the entire atmosphere changed. It no longer felt like a story about missed opportunities. It became a story about second chances, renewed understanding, and the courage to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight from the past. Perhaps this is why these words reached you today. Not to make you dwell on what could have been, but to remind you that clarity often arrives exactly when it is needed most. Life has an extraordinary way of revealing answers only after we've become ready to receive them. The pieces that once seemed scattered suddenly fit together. The questions that once echoed in your mind begin finding peaceful conclusions. And what once looked like a closed chapter quietly reveals itself as the beginning of something entirely new. If this journey has encouraged you, perhaps share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Leave a comment about the moment that resonated with you most, and if these stories continue to bring clarity and inspiration into your life, consider subscribing so we can continue discovering meaningful journeys together. Before this message ends, remember one final thought. Every meaningful connection teaches patience. Every unanswered question teaches perspective. And every hidden truth, no matter how long it remains unseen, eventually finds its voice. Today wasn't about uncovering a secret simply for curiosity, it was about discovering that understanding is always stronger than uncertainty. So carry this message with you. Walk forward with confidence instead of doubt. Let wisdom replace old assumptions. And whenever life seems quiet again, remember this story. Sometimes the silence isn't the end of your journey. Sometimes it's simply the moment before the next beautiful truth chooses to reveal itself. Even after everything had been revealed, one question still lingered in the air. It was the question no one had dared to ask until now. What happens next? That single thought echoed through every heart involved, because truth may explain the past, but it also invites everyone to choose a different future. Stay with me until the final words of this chapter, because what comes next is where the real transformation begins. The family member who had finally spoken the truth didn't stop with one confession. They quietly began encouraging conversations that had never happened before. Instead of allowing old misunderstandings to shape tomorrow, they chose openness. One simple discussion led to another. Walls that once seemed permanent became smaller with every honest exchange. No grand announcement was made. No dramatic scene unfolded. Yet everyone could feel that something important had shifted. The atmosphere no longer carried the weight of hesitation. It carried possibility. Your soulmate, even without hearing every detail immediately, sensed that something had changed. Have you ever noticed how meaningful connections often recognize change before words can explain it? Sometimes hearts understand what conversations have not yet revealed. There was a growing sense of peace where confusion once existed. Questions that had remained unanswered for so long no longer felt heavy. Instead, they felt like chapters that were finally closing with understanding rather than uncertainty. Here's the lesson hidden inside this entire journey. People often believe that one decision defines an entire story. But life rarely works that way. Every chapter prepares the next one. Every delay teaches patience. Every unexpected turn reveals wisdom that couldn't have been discovered on a straight path. The family member finally realized this. Looking back, they understood that while fear had guided many of their choices, it no longer needed to guide the future. That realization became the greatest gift they could offer, not only to themselves, but to everyone connected to the story. Imagine standing at the edge of a sunrise after a long night. The darkness wasn't meaningless. It simply couldn't remain forever. In the same way, confusion has a beginning, but it also has an ending. And once understanding arrives, it becomes impossible to see the journey exactly as you saw it before. You begin noticing that every challenge quietly shaped your strength, every unanswered question deepened your perspective, and every pause prepared you for greater clarity. So if this message found you today, let it remind you of something powerful. Never allow temporary uncertainty to convince you that your story has reached its conclusion. Some of life's most meaningful answers arrive only after every heart involved becomes ready to receive them. The truth you've heard throughout this journey wasn't meant to pull you backward, it was meant to help you step forward with greater confidence, greater peace, and greater trust in the path ahead. And perhaps that is the greatest news of all. The distance was never the destination. The silence was never the final chapter. The hidden truth wasn't waiting to create regret, it was waiting to create understanding. Once understanding appears, new beginnings become possible in ways that no one could have predicted. As this chapter closes, carry one thought with you: the most meaningful stories are not remembered because they were perfect, they are remembered because truth finally found its voice. And when truth speaks, even the longest seasons of uncertainty can become the foundation for a wiser, brighter tomorrow. The story could have ended with the confession, but something even more meaningful was still waiting beyond it. Because the greatest change was never the words that were spoken, it was the new way everyone began seeing the future. Stay with me until the very last line, because one final realization